Good morning and happy Monday. It is not morning when I'm recording and editing this, but it's going to be Monday by the time that you're seeing this. So I am going to be recording this today in natural light because your boy did not feel like putting up a bunch of lights. So as the sun moves, so shall I. All that said, I was not sure if I was the right person to make this video since I am not a woman. But I decided to go ahead with it for reasons I'm not going to unpack because it would make me look like a weird Marxist anthropologist. For the past few weeks, we have seen mostly white folk lying about female athletes at the Olympics and saying that they are men because, you know, they are really good at sports and only men can be good at sports. It's in the Bible. Anyways, you know, transphobia, racism, and misogyny aside, this was kind of wild. Even for them. Often you'll see these blithering idiots on the internet saying, these liberals don't even know what a woman is, after some medical doctor or social scientist dismissed their question out of hand or laughed at them. I mean, like, come on. It's a stupid question. Actually, the purpose of the question is stupid. What is womanhood is an endlessly interesting question. I'm James, your friendly neighborhood anthropologist, and I'll answer the stupid question today. What is a woman? The silly person out there is probably going to expect me to skip over biology because I'm such a woke lefty soy boy. Which, by the way, soy is delicious. I don't know why that makes them so upset. It's like hoteps and corn. I don't know what it is with reactionaries and hating certain vegetables. Let's talk about biology for a quick second. It's actually the least interesting part of this video for me anyways, so we're gonna keep that short. Sorry to all my bioanthropologists out there. When we talk about sex, we are not talking only about the act of reproduction and gene blending. We're also talking about the categorizations between male and female. Sex is way more complicated than the male-female binary. I'll briefly get to that later. But male and female are really only separated by one thing, the size of the reproductive cells, aka gametes. If you have a bunch of tiny gametes, we call those sperm, and you are considered male. But if you have a couple of really big gametes, we call those eggs, and you're going to be associated with female. Notice that I did not say man or woman. More on that later. So I got this definition from a textbook I had to read in undergrad, and I forgot to cite, and I forgot to put it here in my stack of books. But as I remember, the rest of that chapter showed how limited that understanding is. And obviously there's a bunch of exceptions. Some people don't produce either sex cell. Does that mean that they don't get gender or sex? And what about when one side of the gonad has testicular tissue and the other side has ovarian tissue? This happens in humans all the time, and in other animals, one side of their body has ovaries and the other side has testes, and that's the default for a lot of birds. Sunfish start their life as a female, produce male sex cells, maintain both male and female anatomy, and then return to female. So we don't just see this in non-humans, we see it in us too. So in human beings, gonadal differences aren't really enough to determine sex. By the way, neither are chromosomes or DNA, but I'm not gonna explain that because we would be here for 30 minutes just on that, and I'm not interested. But if you're interested, just read chapter 7 of this book and Google the phrases differences in sex development. One in about every 100 people or so have very different sexual development than the average person, and we usually use the word intersex to describe this. So, if biology isn't enough to determine womanhood, let's talk about social aspects. And before I do, I'm just going to read a quick sentence from this book. These dramatic changes are precisely what makes the history of gender so bewildering. As if demonstrated today so clearly, the patriarchal system has been based on unfounded myths rather than on biological facts. What accounts for the universality and stability of this system? So, a question. I'm not gonna leave you hanging. That's what the video is about. This is where I am going to start talking about gender. So, I'm in California. I'm sitting in LA right now, so I don't think that DeSantis can have me arrested from here. yet. But sex and gender exist in this dialectical relationship. That's a really fancy phrase, some fancy talk. It just means that they rely on each other and one makes no sense without the other. Day, night, life, death, etc., etc. Both sex and gender determine bodily and mental and social activities. Sex refers to biological and physical features linked with reproductive functions that result from the combined actions of sex chromosome and hormones. Gender refers widely to like an individual's self-perception, and this is entirely social, not biological. And it's also completely unique to humans. Your pet doesn't have a gender. I'm sorry to tell you. But I will like to point out that some biologists and some anthropologists are starting to find that gender may not be completely socially constructed, but this is extremely new research, and like most of it was like written in like the past few months. And for today, the social science paradigm is that gender is completely socially constructed, but just keep that in mind. Put that in your noodle, put that in your back pocket, alright? So I just said the phrase social construction. Sometimes when people hear the phrase social construct, they think that we are saying that something is imaginary. That's actually not what we're saying at all. Actually, I might do a whole video just about social constructionism, but for now, let me just give a super high overview. I would say that a social construct is a phenomenon that is created and accepted by society at large. So let me give 3 unambiguous examples: money, seasons, and race. These pieces of paper have... Oh, hang on. I'm back. These pieces of paper have numbers and symbols on them, and we all decided that the central bank in these respective countries are going to print these little pieces of paper, and we are going to use them as a medium of exchange. The paper itself has almost no value, and by value I mean the socially necessary label trying to make it pretend I didn't even say that. The value of this little blue piece of paper is socially constructed. It wouldn't be useful if we all hadn't decided in Ethiopia that it was useful. Okay, next, seasons. So if you live on Earth, and I'm assuming that most people want you to live on Earth, if you live in another planet, let me know in the comments below. And then you probably know that at different times of the year, it's warm, or it's cold, or it's hot, or whatever, and we usually call these periods seasons, and in parts of the northern hemisphere, they have 4 discrete times a year. They are summer, spring, autumn, winter, and these correspond to when plants bloom and die and whatnot. So I live in LA, right? And we do not really have these discrete times of year. We just have wet and dry, and within the wet season it's kind of mild, and the dry season is pretty warm like it is now. It's about 85 degrees outside. And also, I am a gardener. I usually start planting in October because flowers start to bloom in January. Despite not really having a winter, we still call the last fourth of the year winter. Everybody here knows that winter refers to the cold time at the end of the calendar, even if it's not cold in your area. That makes sense? Alright, let's keep going. So, one more example. Race. So, before I explain race, I gotta really quickly break down culture and ethnicity. So, as anthropologists, we understand that culture is a shared set of social norms, values, and ideas for a given human population. You gotta know something important. Culture is not biologically determined. It's external and socially constructed. Human beings do not have a predisposition for any particular culture, behavior, or language. These are all human activities. Ethnicity and culture are really similar in that they are not biologically determined. People who share a common culture, language, geographic location, religion, gastronomic palate, and like 1,000 other traits, that all constitutes an ethnicity. Notice that I didn't say any physical traits like skin color or hair texture. So, Coptic Orthodox culture. No matter where you are in the world, the norms are basically the same. But within that Coptic Orthodox culture, there are many ethnicities. We got some Arabs, we got Nubians, we got Thai, all kinds of folk up in there. So race is understood as divisions between human populations based on physical differences such as skin color, hair texture, or eye shape. It says that physical differences are markers for different cultures and social outcomes. Like culture, it's not determined by biology and it's socially constructed. There is no biological difference between me and a Japanese person from Jakarta, even though we look pretty different. So, what does this have to do with gender? Gender also is not biologically constructed. Like I said earlier, gender is about the norms and practices that are expected of men and women. Notice that I did not say male and female. I said men and women. Those are biology words, male and female. Woman and man are social words. So, this varies wildly depending on where you are, what culture you're in, all these things, right? That's super abstract, so I'm going to talk about 3 places in particular. Sulawesi, which is in Indonesia, North America, which is where I'm sitting, and West Africa, which is a place where I've been. So, and we're gonna look at gender expression in these places, and we're gonna see what we can learn. So, let's start with the Sulawesi and the Bugis people. And I'm really sorry if I'm saying that wrong. I've never heard those words out loud. In Bugis society, they have 5 different genders that they have named. Makauru, Onere, Bisu, Kakalbi, and Kakali. And I am again sorry, I do not speak Bahasa Indonesia. So, getting information about this was quite difficult because most of the academic resources for this are in the Indonesian language, for pretty obvious reasons. I did find the book Gender in Bugis Society by the Australian anthropologist Sharon Graham Davies, but I wanted to hear from the people directly. So I pulled information I'm going to say right now from a report published by Universitas Gadjah Mada, which is a research university about halfway between Jakarta and Surabaya, and it's called Leaving No One Behind, Exploring Gender Diversity in the Bugis Community as an Effort to Build Inclusive Societies. So, for these researchers, and as far as I can tell, they don't come from the culture themselves, Bugis society has the typical cis men, makaruri, and cis women, oroani, that most cultures have. They also have in their words, kakari, which are masculine women, and kakalbi, which is feminine men. I don't think this is completely analogous to trans men and trans women, but I think it is a good frame of reference. Bisu is what I'm going to call like this meta gender, as they are seen as having transcendent gender because they are the synergy of all these gender expressions. They are extremely androgynous in appearance and play important ceremonial roles in their community. Oh, I forgot to mention that almost all Bugis society is Muslim and has been since the 15th century. Let's go on to North America and talk about our native siblings. In English, we often hear the term two-spirit to refer to people who do not fit into what I am going to call typical, and by typical I mean white culture, gender norms. This does not mean that they're gay or bisexual, it just means that they engage in gender roles that are not typical of the sex assigned at birth, but also doesn't exclude being gay or bisexual. And this looks very different in different places and different cultures. Two-spirit is not a term that is universally accepted, as many native people themselves have their own words in their own languages to express their own gender expressions in their own cultures. I should point out, though, that native peoples in North America were forced to assimilate into a heteronormative cultural roles at gunpoint in concentration camps, i.e. residential schools, until living memory. The concept of the two-spirit goes back thousands of years, of course, but the term only comes out in the 1990s, during the 3rd annual Intertribal Native American First Nations Gay Lesbian American Conference, which was held in Winnipeg, Canada, with Elder Myra Lamery putting forth the Ashni Ani Be Woniting term Nich Man Ni Godawak, which literally translates to two spirits. And again, my apologies to this community, I have never heard this word pronounced out loud. There are literally hundreds of indigenous people on this continent with their own ideas about gender and sexuality. And that's all I'm going to say about that. I strongly recommend talking to Native people directly and reading their own words directly, as people have been speaking for them for centuries. Finally, gender in Igbo culture. Igbo language is without gender and doesn't make distinctions for possessive pronouns. Let's actually read a passage from this important text called Male Daughters and Female Husbands by anthropologist Ife Atumbe And before I go on, I just want to say that you should read this little book. It's kind of academic in English, but if English is your primary language, then you'll find it mostly accessible. You just have to Google specific vocabulary and concepts that you will learn in an anthropology school. I like this text so much because it's one of the first ones written by a member of the group being studied, which we didn't used to have. Okay, moving on. Thus, certain categories of women, for example, daughters or wealthy women, defined or classified as males, gained access to positions of authority and power structures. The aim of this chapter is to examine the contradictions and inconsistencies in Igbo culture that made this gender system possible. To this end, the gender structure of language and socialization process will be considered. Language and gender. It is my thesis that the Igbo non-distinctive subject pronoun allows a more flexible systematic system in which it is possible for men and women to share attributes. This system, a few linguistic distinctions between male and female gender, also makes it possible for men and women to play the same social rules which in other cultures, especially Western cultures, carry rigid sex and gender association. There is biological distinction of male and female of any species in Igbo terminology. Oki means male and Ini means female. The terms for man and woman are Ikowi and Inani. These are contracted forms of two words, Nwa, child, and the respective gender words, Oki, male, and Ini, female. Hence the distinction, male child and female child. But in subject pronouns, no distinction is made between male and female. But a third person singular O stands for both male and female, unlike the English gender construction, which distinguishes male and female as he and she. As a result, many Igbo people, when speaking English, interchange he, she, his, and her. In Igbo, the third person singular of the possessive pronoun ya stands for both his and hers. Thus, there is no reminder in the speech to distinguish between the sexes. It can therefore be claimed that the Igbo language, in comparison with English for example, has not built up rigid associations between certain adjectives or attributes and gender subjects, nor certain objects and gender possessive pronouns. The genderless word mandu, humankind, applies to both sexes. There is no usage, as there is in English, of the word man to represent both sexes, and neither is there a cumbersome option of saying he or she, his or her, him or her. In Igbo, O stands for he, she, and even it. A stands for the impersonal one, and Naya for the imperative. So she goes on for quite some time in the rest of the chapter, talking about the linguistics of Igbo and how it expresses like the lack of gender distinctions in Igbo culture. Before colonization, Igbo gender construction was extremely flexible and not determined by biology. Furthermore, society was matricentric and women were able and did fulfill any social role necessary. This is not to say that there were no divisions of labor based on sex or whatever, but that the dialectical relationship between men and women was not antagonistic. Dudes who devalued women risked social shame and being shunned, and the reverse was also true. Women could inherit land, and sometimes they were even considered to be men for ceremonial or economic reasons. The reverse was also true. Europeans did not like this arrangement. Protestant missionaries from Britain destroyed the system of women taking political and ritual titles and banished them from public life. They forced women to be dependent on men. And if you want to know more about the overthrow of the woman, read this book. There's a lot more to say, but I think I made my point. So let's answer the question once and for all. What is a woman? Biologically, not so simple. Culturally, it depends on where you are, and socially, it depends on even more factors. A better question is, what is womanhood? It is fascinating to see how different cultures answer this question. The world is a complicated place, and nothing is a simple binary, especially not in biology or anthropology. With that, thank you for watching. In the comments, tell us about womanhood and your culture, and if you found this useful, share it with others. And if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. Also, never forget that a better world is possible.